Well, we're back for another episode of our program, and today we're joined by the Bioenergetic Farmer. Henry joins us from Costa Rica. How you doing?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. Now, you have two parallel interests to mine, and one is that I have a background in agriculture, and I've done some stuff in that regard, and I will continue to do some stuff in that regard. Joel Salatin is a good friend of mine, one of the most iconic regenerative agriculture visual I would say visionaries in the field. He's been on Rogan and many programs many times talking about regenerative beef and chicken and that kind of thing. And then I've got a good friend of mine who I consider to be the Ray Peat or the Ron Paul of botany, and his name is Dana Vinrick. He's been on my program, and he really understands the importance of microbial life and farming. So you have an interest in, regenerative agriculture, innovative approaches to farming, like I do, and then you also have an interest in the kind of biological theories of Ray Peat and the bioenergetic world around him. So I think we'll have a lot of interesting things to talk about today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Yeah, for me, it's kind of trying to merge those two things in terms of exploring Ray's ideas and seeing how we can kind of take the interaction with environment to sort of a different level by maybe by messing around with what sort of plants can do for us, the environments they can create, and then obviously the food in which we can maybe create better structural foundation within ourselves and our communities with higher nutrient density through, I think, actually applying some of his ideas to agriculture.
See, I think when we really get a handle on this and we put all of the real creative efforts together, I have a vision that we will be able to take a tree from a small sapling or cutting, and you will be able to move it into full production and maturity within a year's time when we fully understand nutrition. And I say that, you say, well, what's the rush? Well, we've got billions of people on the planet, and we have psychopaths who do not want billions of people to be on the planet. And they're making all kinds of incentives to get people to stop breeding and stop flourishing and stop being healthy. And they don't want to make it easy for people to have access to nutritionally rich foods. And so I always take the posture of I don't play defense. I want to always play offense. So if I meet a neo-Malthusian program in the world and they say we want to get rid of nutritious, rich, dense food, then I want to double down on the opposite direction and get full fruit trees yielding delicious fruit within a year of them being planted. And that sounds, well, that's too radical. It needs 3 to 5 years or something. No, we can't accept that. We have to go to the future. And that means understanding, you know, some of the principles like bioenergetics provides, right? You were talking before we started recording about aspirin, salicylic acid used for plants. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, well, salicylic acid originally comes from willow bark, and it's found in a bunch of other plants, and it's actually used for a lot of processes there, and it's extremely affordable. Just like it is, some people use it for health reasons. It can be an extremely affordable fertilizer where you can take. I mean, if you want to, you can basically take one aspirin tablet, a 250 milligram, dissolve it in a gallon of water or 4 liters. And I mean, make sure obviously you remove the parts that don't dissolve, and then you've got a foliar spray you can spray your plants with every 2 3 weeks, maybe even longer between, and have in general more high-end quality product. There was a study on pomegranates using different salicylate derivatives, and they all had really positive effects. I mean, to varying degrees, but to me, that's such a simple solution. That's an example of how many different options we have to enhance plant metabolic function, and then that hopefully making higher end higher byproducts, yeah, just much higher quality fruit. I mean, I was at a conference, at one of the Acres USA conferences, talking to a guy running a spectrometry startup, and he said when he was testing grapes, just organic grapes, all organic grapes in California, that the highest degree of variability he saw between two grape producers was 10,000% difference in polyphenolic content. So just between different regenerative or organic farming practices in a relatively similar climatic area, you're able to have huge variability in nutrient content, and what sort of compounding effect you can have from that over large periods of time could be pretty huge. And I think to what you were originally saying about all these issues we're having around food production and sort of going for really low nutrient density food production methods, and we need to try to figure out some ways to get really quickly very high level quality of food production that's year over year gets better and better rather than year over year getting worse and worse. I think the
Yeah.
current number today is something like 50 to 60% of the world is fed by fossil fuel based fertilizer. That's not a demonization of fossil fuels, but it's a problem that we need to use this insane amount of energy to produce chemical based fertilizers that basically really limit the interactions plants have with in the soil with microbes that then prevents the development of that relationship, which is arguably one of the most important things for plants going forward, whether that be, I think like you were talking about your friend through it's mycorrhizal fungi or all these different bacteria, it could be nitrogen fixing bacteria. I mean, spend all this money, put all this effort into chemical nitrogen when there's so much nitrogen in the air. And while there aren't really plants that can fix that nitrogen, there's loads of bacteria that plants can form symbiotic relationships with to produce that within the soil. And year over year, the more you develop that, eventually you don't really need the chemical nitrogen.
Yeah, I'm planning to do a project I have in mind of doing like a greenhouse where I'm going to CO2 max the environment as much as I can. And then we're going to take fruit trees, citrus trees, my background in citrus, and we're going to pump up as much CO2 as we can without killing the plant. And then we're going to mega dose a lot of nutrients to get started with the microbial life, to make sure we get the microbial life handling that side of things. Because I think one of the things, if you give too much CO2 and the plant doesn't have enough, it's just like a human, right? If you're increasing your thyroid production but you're not getting nutritionally dense food to go with that higher energetic level, you can cause problems, right? Nutritional deficiencies can be manifested. And I think the same thing with the plant. If you really put a full court press using rich foundation, because the foundation of a good fertilizer program, really an ethical fertilizer program, is to not need it as much over time. It's to spoon feed it over time. You don't want to have to do too much all the time. You want it to be independent, and creating its own cationic exchange in the bacteria in the soil, creating its own little ecosystem that's on its own, taking care of itself without having to be dependent on expensive fertilizer inputs and foliar sprays. Those can be lighter touch as you go, right? But I think if you added a CO2 and then add CO2 rich water, and then you have, and then you put in some classical music, right, in the speakers in the greenhouse, and then you maybe do something with the electrical stimulation. I think you could do, like, we're talking Hulk Hogan steroidal level fruit trees and stuff. That would be amazing. You know what I mean? And there's some other principles that you can use. You can use light. You can use reflectors of moonlight to enhance moonlight touching the plants. All kinds of strange things. I'm open to anything. So if you guys want to send me ideas, you can email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. But maybe you have some ideas too. What do you think? Because you're the bioenergetic farmer.
Well, I don't want anybody to think I'm a huge expert on anything. I'm kind of pretty early in
No, no,
exploring some
no,
of these
you
ideas,
are.
but
You got the title on Twitter. It's
yeah,
official.
true. That means everything, right?
You,
But
you
I just
didn't
want to, I'm
self.
sorry,
You
yeah.
didn't talk. You didn't title yourself a bioenergetic farmer. You said the bio. Are you the or just bioenergetic farmer?
Bioenergetic, but I
Okay.
take your point. It's a bit arrogant of a title, I have to say. But to just address, before I talk about other ideas, I think just addressing each one of those pieces, and I just think it's always more interesting when you're able to combine a lot of things together. I think
Yeah.
particularly in agronomy, because I mean, you can get much greater compounding effects, particularly if your goal is
Yeah.
to try to get, yeah, say fruit after a year, which I mean, that's a whole really interesting subject that I'm really curious about. Obviously, there's variability species to species in terms of how fast they can be. I
Yeah.
mean, some fruits can just already are ready to go in 6 months or a year, right? But but yeah, I think you do find that with kind of inverse, I think to humans or animals, it does seem like if you enhance metabolic function in plants, they develop much earlier, and sometimes they actually fruit much earlier. Where I mean, we kind of think in the bioenergetic sphere, like early puberty and things like that are generally kind of viewed as a negative. So I
Right.
think if we do soup it up, and it seems like generally when plant function is better, say just even from CO2, right? I think your point is very apt that you don't want to raise metabolism without bringing in all the other components. But I think what's interesting and different about plants versus say humans or animals is the ability for increased function within that plant to increase its ability to access nutrients. So CO2 is very, very good in plants at increasing surface area of leaves, right? And thereby, and just increasing photosynthesis, thereby creating much more sugar, which that plant then is able to utilize as a basically to farm microbes that it wants that are very good at extracting minerals and actually it seems like other nutrients as well and other elements from the soil and then exchanging that for sugar. So I think it's way better if you do all the other things you're talking about. But I do think it's interesting if we're talking about an example in soil, particularly in soil that, at least in an inorganic context, has all the required nutrients, that actually having the CO2 in itself in the long run may actually lead to higher concentrations of nutrients as well, not just sugar.
They did studies on just increasing ambient CO2 just a little bit in sour orange trees, and the vitamin C content was super high, just as well as the sugar and everything else. So
Yeah, and then the one of the points you made that I think is probably one of the things that many people would probably laugh at and think sounds ridiculous, but actually might be one of the most interesting areas is the classical music part that you brought up. There's seems to be a really well. Firstly, there just seems to be effects from like there's actually a pretty interesting wide range of studies, some of which I post about, some of which I want to kind of investigate a bit further. But finding some really interesting interactions between plants and sound and different frequencies. But one of the things that you can really dial in with frequency, it seems like, is stomatocyze. So basically, the pores in the leaves can be heavily impacted by what frequencies they're exposed to. And actually, I think I forget the name of the guy behind it. I think it's Dan Carlson, who developed Sonic Bloom. It's sort of a sound music combination that was found to basically increase stomatocyze, and then they have a foliar spray that they use with it. And I've heard a lot of testimonials of people talking about. I have no affiliation with them, but I still have yet to experiment with it. But there's just seemed to be a lot of really interesting research and then experiences with Sonic Bloom specifically around getting so much more out of your foliar sprays by you having a period of time in which there's a larger opening of the stomata that then allows for greater nutrient absorption. So there may be just interesting effects just from the classical music period, but then also combined with a really interesting foliar approach, and then the CO2 creating just much higher metabolism
yeah, I'm
and having
talking about
all these.
full orchestra. I'm going to create the Willy Wonka of greenhouses eventually with this. Willy
Is this
Wonka,
is this going to be you think in Florida or in Colorado or
probably Florida. Yeah, that's where my
okay.
the only thing about going to Colorado, I don't want to be here too much during the harsh winters. The vicious winter.
Yeah, yeah.
Not my interest. You know what I mean?
No, it makes sense. I think sort of,
Make a
yeah,
snowman, get the hell out.
yeah. I'm done with dealing with snow. That's probably why I'm in
You
Costa
know,
Rica.
I'm not exactly the frequent sun tanner type already, but just being up in that, where you can't go outside, and expose your skin too much and too long. I don't think that's probably good for health. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think,
I'll probably be
yeah,
like a snowbird. I don't know if Colorado is viciously blue, it looks like. And that means that the governance of the state is at the hands of mentally ill mobs. And that's not a good place to put yourself in long term. I don't know if people can, reverse that or not. So I don't know if I'm just exploring Colorado right now, but you know, um, it may be uh, another place that end up going to for a higher altitude thing. But I might be like a snowbird where I come to Florida during the winter, you know, and then I come back to wherever I find a place to be for higher altitude uh, for the summer months, because Florida summers are pretty awful, and it's if it wasn't for the air conditioned invention, nobody would be in Florida. No one would live in Florida, unless they were by some of the windy areas or something cool and refreshing beach area. But nobody wants to be inside of a hot, humid swamp. And it's supposed to be not good for you, according to my last guest on the show, which I think you agree with. Blue, what we call her Helen/Blue on Twitter. And she is talking about how, sickly hot, humid, sticky sea level heat is associated with obesity. I mean, you'd think your body would give you a break, but apparently it just doubles down on the bullshit, and you get hotter and stickier and more humid, and you just get gross. And you think about all the people in the South that live at hot, humid, sticky sea level, right? And there's a massive, vicious plague of obesity in the South. You know what I mean? So it makes you wonder what's going on there.
I think, I mean, for me, I think like I was saying before we started recording, my personal experience before even getting into bioenergetics was humidity was for me was even worse than cold. And cold
What
was
would
pretty
it?
bad, but for me, humidity, it's
Yeah,
like what it was just huge drain on energy and didn't seem to go too well. It's part why for me, and I'm trying to find somewhere. I'm in Costa Rica right now. This may be the place I end up farming and getting set up, but I'm exploring a few different options, particularly in Latin America. But in what I look for, like elevation is really important, not just for metabolic reasons, but also just to create the climatic conditions where it doesn't get very cold because you're close enough to the equator, but humidity is
yeah,
not as bad, and then it stays at a pretty nice temperature. I forget
yeah.
what it is to be in Celsius, but where I live right now, at about sort of 3,500, 4,000 feet, it's pretty much stays between at the lowest it goes to 60 at night sometimes, and at the highest, in the kind of worst time of the year, maybe you get 90 sometimes, and it's
Is
not
it
really
rainy?
humid.
Is it rainy and cloudy in that part of Costa Rica?
Yeah, well, right now it's rainy season, so that's kind of a pretty big bummer. It's pretty
Is
much
it
every day it
cloudy?
rains.
Is it
Not all day,
overcast?
but oops,
Is it
sorry.
overcast?
Yeah, it can be quite overcast.
I bet some of that rich volcanic rock is good to ground on, huh?
Yeah, I'd be really curious. I mean, I think grounding is a really interesting area I'm trying to explore a bit, and I think it's maybe another element of, how we shape our environment, potentially having some really interesting aspects to it, particularly if some of the viewers might not have seen this really interesting account on Twitter called Jessica Genetics, who's basically tests her blood during the day to see. She found that basically she gets a lot of EMF exposure. There's a lot of stacking, uh, and she found in some areas that grounding didn't really work the way it did in other places. Some in particularly residential areas, sometimes potentially due to um, maybe underground wiring. I don't know if she's entirely sure why, but she found that in places where she couldn't properly ground, if she was within 5 feet of a tree's root system, that she was able to ground completely normally and was able to reverse the stacking of her red blood cells, which
What do you mean stacking of the red blood cells? Explain that.
So it's probably a little beyond beyond my scope of fully understanding, but it seems like one of the problems that happens with EMF, at least one that's very easily testable and quite quick, is that if you take a draw of blood and then put it on a slide, you'll notice that the blood cells are really, really clumped together and don't seem to be really functioning properly, which I think has a lot of downstream effects. Um, and that doesn't seem to happen when you've grounded for, I think, like 20, 30 minutes for the exact timing. Um, and that effect doesn't always happen in residential areas, which is kind of interesting, like on grass. But if you were able to, if you do it, at least according to some of the tests Jessica Genetics has done, she tested it on, yeah, I think within, yeah, 5 feet of a tree or multiple trees and was able to see the stacking reverse.
What about grounding beds and stuff and all that?
I mean, I personally use grounding mats just because I feel like maybe it's placebo, but I feel like it makes difference for me. But it does seem like there's research on it. Obviously, you have to test your outlet to see if it's properly grounded. But yeah, I mean, I definitely wouldn't make recommendations to people. I don't feel like I know too much about it, to be honest.
And the grounding shoes to use that?
Yeah, actually, I mean, for most of the stuff on grounding, I'm learning from the Twitter account at Jessica Genetics, just because she's the only one I've really been seeing doing actual testing that we can kind of learn from. She tested ones called, I think they're called Rysel, that have like a little bit of copper at the bottom of the in the shoe. So, and she said it seemed like there was a mild effect from it, so it would take much longer. So I have a pair of those. Just sometimes I go walking with that, but yeah.
Rhizal. Is that related to fungus? God,
I think that's where they got their name from. Yeah. I mean,
it's
that's for me,
fungus.
I'm fascinated by mycorrhizal fungi. So
It's a fungus shoe.
I don't think it has any fungus in it. I don't, yeah, but I think they got the name from the fungus. I don't know what the relationship is there.
So let's go back to what we are talking about. So we have the CO2, we have the greenhouse. This is what I'm going to do. A greenhouse, we're going to maximize CO2 without killing the little guys. And then we're going to water the plants with CO2 rich micronized bubbles of the little CO2 so it can get in there and help the soil and help the microbial life. They'll love it. You know, we're
Well,
going to hit, we're going to hit it with seawater. We're going to hit it
okay.
with rat molasses. We're going to hit it with fish emulsion. We're going to hit it with silicon dioxide. I like a product called Azomite, which is A to
Oh yeah,
Z.
like
Yeah,
the rock powder.
yeah. Run some Azomite on that. Play some beautiful music. Find tinker with the music. Find the soundtrack that works best for citrus.
Yeah, I think
And
that sounds amazing.
and then then we might use a little bit of magnetic fields or electrical stimulation. See what the hell that does.
Yeah, I
Just
mean
see.
that's
We
some of
could.
the more interesting ones. I feel like there's so
Uh,
many questions that are being opened up by the idea that, why is, impacting charge can have such a huge impact on plant growth.
well, have you seen that video? Somebody sent it to me. I don't remember who it was. So somebody sent me a video, a documentary with Leonard Nimoy. Remember him, Star Trek?
Oh yeah.
He was the narrator of this documentary following the scientist in the 70s, I think that was 60s or 70s, that was trying to figure out how to communicate to the plants.
Hmm.
And he does a lot of this guy. I can't remember his name, but someone we'll put it in the notes. Um, the expert, that he was an expert in doing polygraphs, right? And he
Hmm.
put plants up. He hooked up the plant to the polygraph, right? And then one day, somebody accidentally knocked over a glass of little shrimp that he had, and when the little shrimp fell to the earth and perished, the little plant polygraph went whoa! It went ape nuts. It just went crazy with empathetic terror for the shrimp. One time he was thinking of the image of fire, and the polygraph on the plant went wild with stress. Just thinking about fire. Just scared the hell out of the thing. Um, then there's some other examples in that video where a Japanese woman is, I don't know what the world's going on with that one, but she was trying to teach the Japanese alphabet to a cactus or something. And the little thing was talking back. I mean, I was amazed. I hope that wasn't a hoax, but she was talking. She was saying, oh, and then the little plant would go, oh. I was like, what? They had some kind of an electrical thing hooked up to that plant. And I was like, are you kidding me? Man, that is going to kill the vegans, man, when they find out that plants are like smarter than animals. My God, on a different level, you know? I mean, good Lord. We have no clue what we're dealing with, really, you know, because everything has been totally, you know, they have, the West has, you know, we can always pick on it. I love a lot of things about the West, but whatever reason, they have this total bias against magnetism, magnetic fields, consciousness, all these things that are probably the same, you know, and they don't want to go there. Metabolism, you know, energy, consciousness, magnetism. That is, they don't want to allow that to be an area of serious inquiry in the realm of plants or animals or human physiology. They don't. You know, they want to preclude that and make it all about genetics. I mean, I can tell you in the citrus industry in Florida, that's all they do. They never wanted to get back to the basics, the experts, the government funded experts never wanted to get back to the basics of nutrition and getting the microbial life really rich and healthy in the soil, getting the cationic exchange, the trace minerals, getting your calcium and your ratios right with all the different, you know, ratios in perfect harmony mineral wise. They never wanted to take that seriously. They all wanted to spend all their money on finding some genetic, you know, mutation they could put a spinach gene in with the next citrus, you know, lab created variety that would be immune to the greening disease, right? So the focus on greening was like a scapegoat ultimately, what to not deal with the poor nutrition of the monocrop citrus industry that have been using weak uh, nutritional inputs for decades, and it just caught up to them when greening came around. The Asian psyllid came by and infected the trees with this citrus greening disease that clogged the phloem tubes. They didn't have, you know, you get what I'm saying. It was like it was the lighting of the match on this whole, you know, kerosene soaked environment, right? You know, and they didn't want to get back to the basics of nutrition. They just wanted to try to find a genetic solution, just like they do with diseases, right? You know, they never want to get into the environmental metabolic system of what causes you to have a growth that's metastatic. They just want to go into trying to come up with immunotherapy and all this stuff that's expensive and patentable and all this nonsense. So there's a bias towards looking at this field of so-called consciousness or whatever and magnetic fields and how that works. So have you seen that video of that little Japanese lady talking to the cactus and she goes say, oh, and then the little thing goes, oh, and I'm like, I don't know what in the world was going on there. It's obviously they don't have vocal boxes like we do.
Yeah, no, well, yeah, I'd like to address a lot of the points you brought up, but yeah,
Yeah.
on yeah, that documentary, I haven't seen it. I don't know whether that you know, it's very possible it could be hoax or not a hoax, but are really interesting elements around plant sensation and potentially communication that seems to be way more complex than we think. And I mean, if you think about it, the largest organism we kind of like really know about it, if you kind of think of one collective organism, are kind of these I don't know if it's the largest organism we know of, but I mean, we've found mycorrhizal connections between a whole forest being where it's essentially one mycorrhizal connecting all of them, where they're sharing all sorts of different information, sharing resources, collectively creating this huge thing that's about 40 acres. So, I mean, you think about how, you know, whether you think about how many neurons is going on in us, how many inputs is allowed through structure that size is potentially, you know, it could be quite interesting from maybe potentially consciousness, intelligence, communication. I have seen some things around plant sensation that I don't know whether they're real or not. That could be really interesting. I mean, some of the Russian research where they were able to do something to a plant right next to another plant, and that other plant really freaked out.
Yeah.
I think recently
Yeah.
there's been some very good
Yeah.
research on.
I saw that one thing. I think it was in Russia too, where they were chopping up a head of cabbage very
Yeah,
viciously. and the other cabbages could identify who the one that was stabbing their cabbage friend. Like when
Yeah,
other researchers walked into the room, they didn't have a response. But when it was the one that was stabbing the heck out of their cabbage friend, they were like really stressed out. And I was like, man, that's brutal. These vegans are like terrorists to these poor things, you know? They're over
yeah,
there just hopping away with this self-righteous glee, and these plants are like, oh my God, get away from me, you freak. You know? You smell
yeah,
awful.
yeah. Yeah,
You
I
know?
think the vegan, yeah, that's another point. The vegan thing is I find very interesting from if it's purely from a ethical, trying to do no harm to anything
Yeah.
perspective, it's sort of a very condescending view of plants, I think, personally.
Yeah, it is.
But then it's also, I also think if you only care about animals, you can look at, okay, what's it like if you kill a cow, how many people are fed off of killing one animal versus just even plowing some wheat or any sort of conventional agriculture is killing a lot of animals. So,
And
I mean, you
vegans are
can
definitely
definitely,
producing more methane gas than the average cow, I would imagine. Don't you
yeah,
think so?
I would imagine so as well. Yeah.
All that nasty, you know, beans and stuff they eat, lentils and, very inflammatory foods, and they're just tearing into it left and right, left and right, left and right. But it comes from a sacrificial crisis of being in a Christ haunted world, right? We live in a world that's haunted by perceptions of martyrdom or scapegoats. We perceive scapegoats and targets of sacrifice to be kind of holy in the sense of, and that's where the vegan thing comes from, right? It's like, hey, I can live in a world where I don't have to eat an animal, and that makes me self-righteous compared to you. This is a kind of a mentally deranged reaction to a sacrificially destabilized world, right? Because Christ comes into the world and he undermines the sacrificial hierarchies of traditional societies. And he opens up this radical fluidity in terms of like, I'll put it this way, thousands of years ago, right? But mythologies would treat the dragon like the beast to destroy, right? But at the end of one of the Jurassic Park movies that came out recently, they literally decided to unleash all of the dinosaurs into suburban America because that was much more ethically tolerable than to just allow the dinosaurs to die. So they would much rather allow little Timmy to be out in his backyard and have a velociraptor come by and tear him apart. That was much more considered to be the ethical right decision than just to allow the dinos to go bye bye. See what I mean? So there's such an aversion to sacrifice of the weak, of the monster, of the vulnerable, the animal, that yeah, it can turn into a cultural religion like veganism, you know. And at the core, there is nothing wrong with trying to limit your consumption of excess animal food. I mean, there's some in and of itself, but what it becomes often is a kind of religion, a
Well,
mental.
I think not that this is the diet I take, but it was interesting. I think there was an episode of maybe it was General Energy where Ray Peat was talking, or Dr. Ray Peat was talking about, was asked, "What do you think the most ethical, like least harmful diet you consume?" And he said, "Well, dairy and fruit, because it's probably the only thing that's not harming something, right? But
Yeah,
fruit is something the plant is making for its own reproduction and for the benefit of it, the consumer of
right.
it. And then milk, I mean, I guess you can make some arguments around, like if I guess if you're completely separating the calf or baby goat from its mother and you're taking all the milk, maybe there's some things there. But I think you can also
You need
just
to
take
share.
excess.
You need to
Yeah.
share. So
So I mean, for me, I find it's a lot of like I think more morality is something really important. We all need to take a very strong look at the actions we take, our impact on the world, our impact on our community and people around us. But I just find it a lot of times strange, whether it's veganism or some of these other things, where it just seems like will be a preoccupation with one thing, but not a very holistic, I think, perspective on morality from
yeah,
us.
right. You can't have holistic perspective if you support Killer Kamala or people like that. You know what I mean? Those are people that they do is just pollute. And I mean, everything that the government does and the military industrial complex does, they just pollute and stink up the world, and they just they just grind human flesh into sausage all over the world. I mean, it's disgusting pathetic. Why can't Trump or anybody talk like that? Because they're a part of the system too, of course. But it's just stinky and disgusting, and we need to call it out for what it is. If you cannot say you're a holistic person, if you support Killer Kamala or any of these types of psychopaths, because they don't care about anything good and flourishing. Killer Kamala will never tell you that CO2 could help you reduce diseases that you have. They never tell you that. Never tell you to go to high altitude. The big pharma didn't tell her to say it. She won't say it. She's a psycho, and she's a mental midget. And we need to
Well,
stop supporting psychopaths and mental midgets. But
or
people,
they'll make everything about the environment, and then it's like we have to have we have to clear a bunch of forest land, set
yeah,
up solar panels that can't
yeah,
even function as a baseload power source, that use a ton of coal to be made, use a lot of toxic materials, have to be recycled after 20 years. It's,
yeah.
yeah, I think for me,
Instead, we could be powering our homes with seawater using a low temperature nuclear type reactive, like motor and power cell using ocean water eventually. I think that's something we could easily do if we had people with right brain intuitive creativity being unleashed in science with some funding going towards them. I think these are things that you could easily develop. There, there are things right under our noses. So many people will say, well, we can't solve these big diseases because they're so big and so bad that surely if there was an easy solution for it, we would have figured it out by now. And it's like, no, you do not understand the power of mimetic groupthink to miss things right under our noses because everybody is in a blind. It's just like this last pandemic, right? So many people did something so catastrophically stupid for their health because everybody else was doing it. And they did so many catastrophically stupid things, like staying out of the sun because health authorities said the sun would do nothing to help you, for vitamin D, and staying indoors and eating rancid seed oil foods and, and taking experimental garbage medicines that we now know as the greatest medicine ever discovered in God's earth, the one that they made everybody take. And so many people did it with joy and glee. And it was just mimetic hive mind group thing. And they missed solutions right under their noses. Clear out the seed oils, get vitamin D, ground, get fresh air, go to a higher altitude place if you can, take some, inexpensive minerals and vitamins and some inexpensive generic drugs, and you'll be okay. Those little things were right under our noses and we missed it because people are more mimetically inclined to follow that which is higher social status from their perception than it is to follow the truth, right? And I think that's what's going on with things like solutions for the big diseases, solutions for energy, when I talk about ocean water, cold fusion or whatever, or talk about 24/7 energy panels or anti-gravity or elemental transmutation, people say, oh, I don't want to do nothing because if that was easy to do, they would have already done it by now. No, you're living in a mythology. Human nature does not govern itself by some objective ascertaining of the facts. It is governed by mimetic group mythology and social status pressure. That's what it's mostly about, right? Sorry to go on that, but I think that's important.
yeah, no, I think, yeah, I mean, part of my concern with just so many different angles in which I'm really concerned with, I think, deterioration of so many things and shutting off of all these really interesting possibilities is part of why I'm kind of going on this journey. I mean, my background and still is my day job is working in financial markets, and I like a long time ago kind of looked at some of the trends in agriculture and food and was pretty concerned about. I mean, we've had a lot of periods in which it looked like we were about to have really big issues around food production, and then something always ends up solving it. But when you just look at the level of soil degradation and how we haven't really taken pathways to we have all these avenues in which, if you take a regenerative agricultural approach, you'll have less production maybe first year one, year two, than you would from
Right.
conventional agriculture. But every year you do it, you get higher and higher yield. And in some cases, after 3 years, you might be able to have much higher yield, much better quality product. And yeah, I want, whether it's through my projects, hopefully through a lot of other projects, hopefully, especially through your projects, that we're able to just try to create these foundations of production environment that allow for so much more opportunity for us all. and
Yeah.
move things in a different direction. Because for me, it's really just feeling like deterioration year over year and year over year. Just I doesn't cut it. I think
Yeah.
it's gotta
We can't
be.
accept that. That's a stupid thing to accept. Why would we accept that? You know? So
Yeah, I think, and I think there's a lot of avenues. I mean, I think farming is just one, but to me, it seems like
I love
a
that era of America from like 18, like the 1870s, 1880s, all the way to like 1920s. You get this explosion of technology, and I think they had nutrient dense food to help them power their brains easier. You know what I mean? And they had less toxins. They had less PUFA consumption. You know, they were not eating, you know, garbage food as much. They were eating, some people were poor and had to struggle, but, I'm talking about Alexander Graham Bell. I'm talking about, you know, Henry Ford, Nikola Tesla, these folks that did such great things to make things to serve their fellow neighbor, you know, that correlated with a certain environment food wise, right? That we've lost, right? And so you kind of want to get that back and go better than what they got, do better than what they do, or build better than what they had.
Yeah, and I think that there's even more. Um, I think if you go even further back, it's a little more mysterious, and we're still trying to figure out maybe what was going on. But it seems like there might have been some really interesting approaches that I'm trying to learn more about, that were the foundation of these really, really large civilizations. That like so for instance, the Tiwanaku civilization in Bolivia, that's not too far away from Lake Titicaca. That's um, I think they were supporting over 1 million people at 4,000 meters above sea level, which means it basically freezes. I've actually been there. It freezes every night, which makes any sort of large agricultural production extremely difficult. So how they were able to support such a large population with in conditions that would be really difficult, and it's not necessarily that you can go very close by, particularly without having horses or anything like that, to be able to produce large amounts of like because they could use a horse maybe to potentially go to a lower elevation and then maybe use carts to try to bring stuff up from somewhere where it doesn't freeze every night. But they were able somehow to produce astronomically large amounts of food and to support such a large, pretty advanced civilization. I mean, we've only excavated, I think, like 3 or 4% of the Tiwanaku site, which just from what we found is pretty massive. And there's something there, and there's other examples you can look at around the world where it seemed like there's really interesting agricultural activity without necessarily the conventional fertilizers we have. I think that was a combination of a lot of things. I mean, they've done some experiments with some of the fertilizer that they think they're using from the bottom of the lake. But also, there's a really interesting book called Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty. I think it's John Burke, and I forget the name of the other author, where they go to a lot of these sites to basically test seed germination in different places and test some theories around structures that seem to do things around electrical charge, which may
Yeah.
seem not very controversial. It's very out there, but they were able to do experiments in many of these places and find way better germination in, say, at the top of a pyramid where there's much higher voltage on certain days. I mean, we know that like higher elevation does tend to lead to voltage, but there's something about structuring and certain materials like basalt seems to have really interesting properties in terms of I mean, like there's one thing I posted on my Twitter where they did an experiment and I think it was somewhere in New England where just adding basalt to the soil after 6 months, there was the areas that had basalt versus just normal soil, there was 20 times more earthworm activity where the basalt was, and somehow that was
Yeah.
attracting the earthworms. And that obviously has all sorts of personally, I've done interesting experiments with plants and basalt as well, and maybe for the people who are like worried about what you're doing to plants or what have you, but it might seem a little cruel. But I've done like water stress tests on plants, one with basalt, one without, and tested other things as well. But the stress resistance to water stress was way higher with the basalt, and it seems
Yeah.
like a lot of these civilizations were using basalt and maybe other things that we don't really know about to enhance agricultural production and create a much greater foundation for society that was able to support all these pretty crazy activities they're able to
What
do.
era was that they were doing that? What time?
Well, it's pretty interesting because the range of these times is huge. So some could be 5,000 years ago, some could be 1,000. I mean, I think the Tiwanaku civilization current belief is maybe I think maybe 1,500 years ago.
And
But
now they don't know how to do the same stuff today up there, huh?
I mean, I've been to that area. It's a beautiful part of the world, but it's arguably more desolate now than it probably was then. I think less people are supporting that than
I wonder what they did.
yeah, I don't know. It's kind of one of these mysteries that I kind of want to explore. I mean, another one that's a little more simple and easy to understand is the Amazon, where they're kind of just starting to do LiDAR on it and finding, and also some of the Amazon is being cleared, finding massive civilizations. It's like nobody was expecting that, right? And
And hot and
it's
humid over there, or no?
yeah, I mean, I don't think it's not where I'd want to live personally, though.
Yeah.
I'd love to see
Those
some of the animals.
have those they have those creepy dolphins that have pink skin and eyes, that stare
Oh
at
yeah,
you.
yeah,
Those
yeah. They're
little
one
weird,
of
yeah, those weird
I think
noses that come
Yeah,
out at you.
I think they're one of the few freshwater dolphin species. Um,
Uh,
but what's interesting though about thinking about civilization in a different way is it seems like one of the big underpinnings of their of some of these civilizations that they found with it's been this terra preta, this special soil that's man-made that lasts. I mean, it takes at least 500 years, maybe more. It takes a really long time to degrade. I think it loses about 1% every year or something like that, degrades, which is made from a special type of charcoal called biochar
uh,
that some studies I've seen it can be a net negative for the year one or year two because it's
yeah,
kind of just sucking up all this bacteria and all this nutrition that kind of pulls it away from the plant. But after that sort of first or second year, or if you fertilize the biochar ahead of time, it seems like you have all these really interesting benefits that it seems like ancient Amazonians, or maybe not ancient, but older Amazonian civilization was using for the foundation to build all these crazy structures
yeah.
and support way more life than is currently there from a human perspective. And I mean, there's just even interesting examples like they've done tests with biochar where they put it with 10% biochar, 90% just pure sand, and it had the same water holding capacity properties as sandy loam, which is kind of what
Yeah.
you're going for.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I'm in a bit of a rant here, but I just think that there's so what you're sort of talking about in the direction of civilization and where certain things are going wrong. I think it's kind of as well as also the late 1800s and early 1900s, all this advancement. I think we've lost a lot of really interesting tools that we used to think of that were a little bit different than maybe sort of the technology we currently think of or how we currently think of technology. I think if you can build this foundation of really high quality food, I think that can do really interesting things. And I think it might have done some things for some of these civilizations you wouldn't have expected to be as advanced as they were.
Well, landing the plane here, let's talk very briefly. Just give us a couple points by point of nutrition you like to use for your plants, and then also show us some of the fruit that you're producing.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. So I'd say it's always hard to just boil it down to a few things, but just doing simple foliar sprays, aspirin's one of them. I mean, you can experiment with a lot of the bioenergetic substances, like whether it be glycine, proline. It seems like some of the B vitamins, you just have to be careful about dosing, but that can be an incredibly affordable way to improve plant metabolic function, which then can maybe lead to less disease in the plants, but also maybe higher end product. But I think really, if there's just one thing that I was to focus on for food production, it would be mycorrhizal fungi and other microbial connections. Because if you can get that right, basically the plant will be able to extract whatever it needs, except in certain soils where you may need to do testing that there may be something like manganese or one element that just isn't there. But almost every other element will be available to that plant if it has a high level of microbial functioning, which if you're doing fruit trees or pretty much most plants have some sort of, I think it's over 90% of plants have some symbiotic relationship with mycorrhizal fungi, which could be one of the most important ones. And that'll share water, nutrition. It'll allow the different trees to basically share nutrients with each other by giving it to the fungus, and it will kind of distribute it. So that for me is if you can get that right. And then if you want to experiment with biochar, basalts, all these other crazy stuff, there's some really interesting avenues there. But I think trying to get the microbial thing, microbes right is probably the best. Um,
Show some of the fruit you got there.
yeah, so currently, so I've got some pretty cool fruits that I really like. I actually didn't grow these, but so this is a mangosteen, which just tastes amazing and has a lot of pretty crazy polyphenolic compounds in the rind of it. I actually had a friend who had a pretty bad jellyfish sting that he rubbed the mangosteen on, and it cleared up pretty quickly.
Wow.
Um, this is a tamarillo, which they call like a tree tomato. It's closely related to a tomato. For me, it tastes decently, but I don't know, I have no idea why, but for me, this is like one of the biggest like nootropic buzzes I ever had. Like I just eat it, and if I eat three or four and then I combine it with a couple other fruits, I really like nootropics and I mess around with those too, but this is actually does more for me for some reason. And to what you were talking about before in terms of time for a tree to go, I think it's about normally you can get 2 to 3 years from seed,
Yeah.
probably faster from a cutting from these guys for a full tree that's producing fruit. I'm sure if you enhance metabolism and all that, you could probably get that a lot lower. And then this guy is my favorite fruit, which is in season right now. They call them mamachinos here, but generally it's called a rambutan. It's related to lychee in the soapberry family. That combined with Tamarillo and mangosteen, I mean, I'm pretty lucky at the moment being able to combine all those things together. It tastes great. But I did not actually grow these. Currently, I'm selling my Texan farm, and then I'm looking at either buying land here or I'm still checking a couple other options in Latin America. But hopefully, it won't be too long before I'm trying to produce really, really high quality fruit. I'm just doing some experiments on my porch at the moment
How
and
can people
garden.
follow your work and keep in touch with what you're doing?
I'm hoping to do a lot more, but currently it's just bioenergetic farmer on Twitter. I think it's bioenergetic far, like FAR, because I couldn't put full farmer on Twitter because of the number of characters. I have an Instagram, but nothing on there yet. But I'm hoping to look at doing a few things in the future. I've been really blown away actually by Costa Rican coffee, and there's like varieties here that I've never seen before. There's a whole
Yeah.
nother berry called geisha natural process where you leave much more of the coffee berry on it. So I'm potentially looking at actually doing a coffee exporting project as well
Very
that
good.
people can keep in touch with that if they're interested.
Well, stay in touch and we'll look forward to seeing what you produce. Give us some updates as soon as you get some fruit to show or coffee. We'll be looking forward to seeing it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. I can't wait to hear more about this greenhouse and all the projects you've got going on. It's pretty exciting actually.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And we're just going to do a full court press to do inventions and discoveries. And, you know, we don't have to, people don't have to be stuck on one narrow lane. That's okay if you want to do that, but you can do other things too and make it all. Look at the founding fathers of our country. They were tinkerers, inventors, farmers, winemakers, philosophers, economists at the same time, very, very, and I think we need to have that American Renaissance. That means people should, not be afraid. I am not a green thumb guy. I'm not pretending to be some farmer by any means. I've worked in the industry in different capacities, but it's something that I'm not going to sit and say, well, let somebody else think of that. I'm going to try it because if you don't do things, nobody will do it. You really, who else is going to play classical music while you're magnetically stimulating plants and pumping them full of CO2? I mean, come on. I mean, that sounds exciting.
Yeah,
And I'm looking forward to see what you produce. Are you going to have some mangosteen for us to have on a neighbor's choice?
sure. I mean, ship some out or something. I can get some that they produce here. It's really good. I don't
Oh,
know how easy it is to get in.
I know there's
They
like
do.
multi marketing companies that try to sell you a $200 bottle of mangosteen with apple juice in it. Dear God, we need to get,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
not going to make.
I think I'm currently getting it for about $5 a kilo. So it's yeah, relative to the other fruits here, it's much
Yeah,
more expensive.
yeah.
But I was also looking online, and there's really not a yeah.
How's
Most of
this?
it seems nobody's really
How,
making products out of it.
how's the citrus over there? Good.
It's really good. I mean, they're not really dealing with the citrus greening issues, which means there's a lot more availability. I get really fresh. I can get a gallon of freshly squeezed orange juice from the market every Thursday, so I just load up on that. It's really good, and it's pretty affordable.
How's
Um,
you got mangoes and good stuff like that?
yeah, mangoes. We've got mangoes. I mean, you get watermelon, normal melon. I mean, I eat probably a whole papaya every day.
Yeah.
Like, um, you've got some of the banana varieties as well, like red bananas that I quite like. Cherimoya is one of my favorite fruits. Like Ray actually talked quite a bit about it.
What's that?
It's sorry, I didn't have one with me, but it's in the Annona family. I don't know if you ever heard of soursop before.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's a relative to that, but they call it custard apple because it has kind of a custardy flavor to it. Yeah, it's really good.
yeah.
Soursop as well. I eat a lot of soursop, passion fruit. You pretty much and for fruit you can get almost anything here. I like chocolate, but also the actual fruit in the cacao is really good.
Yeah.
So if you can get a fresh cacao that's got a lot of meat on the inside, it's really good. It's
All right.
like
Well, thank you
candy.
for your time, sir. It's
Yeah,
been great talking to you. I really appreciate your knowledge you've shared with us and your enthusiasm. And I think everybody should be following, but the bioenergetic farmer, Henry, our guest today. Thank you.
thank you, David. I really appreciate you having me on.
Very good. And if you want to contact us again, you can email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. I'm David Gornoski. Godspeed.